Studio tour. Hey, I'm Steve Smith from Steve in the Mix. Today I want to show you around my little space. We record vocals, guitars, anything else that needs to be recorded, do full production, and mix records in here. So there's been a few requests. Let's have a look around. So I was trying to think of a clever way to put this in some order of operations, but I think the easiest way is just to work our way around the room. Starting with the computer, so I use a Mac computer. I really just want to address something quickly here. Mac PC, who cares? It's a tool. I'm comfortable on this. I also have a PC. I'm pretty comfortable on that, but not as comfortable as on a Mac. Plus, I've been a Logic user for a long time, and I wouldn't want to give that up. So, I'm still on Mac. A lot of people have switched. Whatever your flavor is, it's like people arguing over Ford Chevy or Coke Pepsi. Use what you get the best results on. Nobody listens to the radio and goes like, wow, I bet they used a Mac to make that record. So whatever. Next thing we look at here are studio monitors. So the Yamaha NS10Ms, the classic, I've been using them for a really long time. You can really detect pitch really well in these speakers, and they don't tend to sound, they kind of sound honky. And there's a theory, and I agree with it, that your mixes tend to sound the opposite of what your monitors sound like. So just to expand on your mix sounds the opposite of the speaker, the Yamahas sort of have a mid-range hump, and they're a little weak in the bottom end and in the top end. So when you're mixing, you tend to compensate for that. And when you get something sounding big in the Yamahas and bright and open, it tends to sound extra big and extra open in a more hi-fi consumer kind of speaker. So that's one of the reasons why these are favored a lot, because you have to work really hard to make that work. And if you overload the bottom end, they tend to sound farty, and you can really tell when they overload, obviously. And that really helps get the right amount of bass, because when these speakers overload, you kind of know that they're going to really top out on consumer speakers. They're really good for mixing things that are going to end up on earbuds too, because you know the earbud doesn't have a very big sound. So if you get it sounded big in there, that's going to help you in a lot of other places. Because I'm used to them, and because they give me some information, they're like for information purposes, not because they sound so amazing. The Focals are a much sort of high fidelity speaker. They have a lot of detail, really nice high end. I can really hear what's going on with the low mids in these speakers. I can really feel separation. Plus, it's a contemporary speaker, and I feel like in order to get the volume or the level of the vocal to sound contemporary, I have to make it work in a speaker like this, which is a little bit more frequency smile faced. And so that is a really good check, and they sound so different from the Yamaha speakers that I have a great deal of confidence that when I get something sounding really great in both sets of speakers, that it's going to translate well. Of course, I still check for that, but that's a really good indication of where I'm at. Obviously, you can see the lava lamp. You know what? You need vibe in a studio. And this little speaker here is made by the Sonic Farm guy, well, my buddy Boris from Sonic Farm. I'm going to talk about him in a minute. He makes the Sonic Farm preamps. This is sort of like his version of an Oratone. It was a short run. You can't buy these anymore, unfortunately, because he can't find the drivers. But I run that in mono. I check my mixes in mono and make sure that I can hear the bottom end, even 808s in those speakers. And that's my test for, is it going to translate into like small systems, speakers in malls, earbuds, all that kind of system that's going to have very little top end and very little bottom end, and also run it in mono. So that's like an extra check to make sure that the mix works in all kinds of spaces. You can see a few awards, and let me just talk a little bit about awards and why those are around. So, you know, I've got some SOCAN awards, some Billboard stuff, random things. I don't want to get into what they are. I'm not trying to make you think like I'm some big shot, because I'm not. And why I have them in the studio is for credibility. So in our business, we don't tend to post resumes, but what we have is credits. And when people come into the studio or go to the website and they see that I've worked on some records that have done well, there's confidence and there's some assurance that I will have a clue what I'm doing, and that helps, and I think it really sets an artist's mind at ease that they're in good hands. So that's why they're here. Let's start looking at Outboard Gear. Okay, taking a run down the left side, this is my Purple Audio. It's a copy of an 1176, which is kind of compressor that's really, really famous. This is like a remanufactured version with all modern stuff. It's got LED lighting in it. I like it because I looked at original units and I love the sound of these things, but the original units were really expensive, and I knew that I was going to have to recondition them for about the same price as what this cost me. And this sounds like a particular version that is really sought after. I love it. So in my vocal chain, it's very common for me to go from a preamp into this unit, and it imparts a very specific, grainy kind of sound that sort of makes the vocal jump forward. It's definitely got a flavor to it. An old MIDI unit that I have, a TR rack. Every time we fire one of these things up, we think, oh man, that just sounds so amazing. So I try and use these things in productions from time to time because it just adds another flavor. It makes the production sound bigger and richer. Great sounds in there. This is the MIDI interface that I use, made by the same company that made Logic years and years ago before Apple bought them. Really great unit. My favorite Roland machine, tons of sounds in here. Again, a different sonic color than a lot of the plugins, and the Triton. If you look back onto records that were made in the late 90s, early 2000s, these guys were used on almost everything. I've got a K oscillator here. Just wiggle my finger around when I need something that's just a little bit unusual. These are Distressors, a really great all-round, sort of a Swiss Army knife of compressors. I use this on vocals a lot. I don't really like these for tracking vocals very much. They don't impart the same quality or color of sound that I really like on the Purple Audio or an 1176, but I use these on mixdown a lot for vocals. I love this thing on drums too, especially on 808s. I have two of them, so I can use them either in stereo or on a pair. Like lots of times I'll have lead vocals and I'll need two channels because they're switching back and forth. This is, yeah, a 1073. So this is a remanufacture of a Neve 1073 made by a company called Brent Averill. They're now just called BAE. There's another one over here, which you can see that's the more recent reissue. And then I've got this metering up here that's on my master, and that's just so I can see my overall mix level as I'm working without having to move around the screen or pull up a second window. This is an SSL compressor. It's the same compressor that you find, it's called the quad compressor by some people. This is the same compressor that you find on the mix bus of a 4000 series SSL. So I love this compressor, but it only really works on certain things. Every rock record that was made in the 80s is the sound of this compressor. As soon as you plug this in and start working with this compressor, you feel like, oh wow, that's the sound of all the rock records that I really love. I don't tend to use it on the urban stuff as much just because of the way it affects the bottom end. It's a great sounding compressor. Again, can't use it on everything, but in love with this piece of gear. The way that it makes guitars and vocals sound on certain records is so great. New addition, this is actually on loan from a client. This is a Bricasti M7. It is probably the best reverb I've ever heard. I'm scared to keep using it because it sounds so good and it won't be here forever. Another 1073. So again, the world's most famous preamp. This is the most sought after thing. It's a remanufacture, but the components are 100% the same, or maybe 99% the same as what would have been built into these originally. So originally this would have been a strip, you know, this way on a Neve board. So I have two of those so that I can record in stereo. This is an old kind of crappy compressor. I sort of discovered this based on Dave Pensato talking about it. I didn't pick this up for a lot of money. I only have one, so I can only use it in mono, but it does something that I really like on kick drums, and I will use it from time to time, even though I have some plug-in options that are very good, and a lot of the samples that I use now aren't mono, they're stereo, and they're narrow, but a lot of the samples now do have a stereo component to them. This right here is called the palindrometer. It's actually just nothing, but it's just kind of funny, and it looks like a nice piece of gear. It sort of looks like a Pultec the way it's finished, and it's just kind of a joke. If you look at everything on it as a palindrome, which is a word that is the same frontwards as it is backwards. So here is the Avid audio interface that I'm using. That is their big guy. Sounds really great, really open. It does make a difference what you use, and I find that I can capture things really accurately with that. And for coming, I have all this analog gear, and I need this. It's got 16 in and outs analog, so that I can go to a piece of gear and put it back in again without degrading the sound. Cush Audio Clariphonic. I use this to open up top end or presence in a recording. It's really easy to overbake stuff with this, but it's a really great tool to give high end or high mids a bit of lift and forwardness without being harsh. This is kind of old school. I've got a patch bay here. So the patch bay connects to all the analog gear here, so I can run anything into anything else. I can change the Pro Tools output. Admittedly, most of this stuff stays the same most of the time, and I just have each piece of gear into a different input and output of Pro Tools, so I can just open it as if it's a plug-in. I have to be careful, of course, to make notes when I use this stuff in mixes. This is a newer edition. This is made by a Vancouver company called Sonic Farm. Full disclosure, the guy who designed this is a really good friend now. I paid full price for this. I wasn't given this piece of gear for free. I really, really love this thing. It's definitely a different flavor than a 1073, so I will use this or the other preamp depending on what I'm recording, and I'll certainly try both. For whatever reason, this tends to be, it's a tube preamp. It's less honky than the 1073. I love this thing on acoustic guitars and on vocals that are a little bit hard sounding. This can really take the bite out of them and make them smoother. This is a mastering EQ. I don't use this as much on mixes anymore as I once did, but it's very, very smooth, and I can get a lot of EQ. I usually have this on the mix bus, and I can get a lot of really good EQ out of this. That has a nice flavor to it and sounds really, really smooth. If I need to add top end to a recording, I find that this is a really good option. It doesn't introduce much harshness. It's not the world's most expensive monitor section, but it works good enough, and I have 4 headphone outputs which I can use to output to lots of headphones in the room, and that way I can have recording vocals or guitars in here with 2 or 3 people all listening at the same time. It's got really good switching, and I don't think it's the best sounding unit ever, but at the end of it, it's not actually in the signal path for the actual recording. So for monitoring, I find it works really, really well. We've got places for people to sit. This is sort of mic stand corner, music stands and stuff like that. The mics are in cases under the chairs. I don't keep the mics up because, for a couple reasons. One, if one gets knocked over, that's going to be expensive. We really don't want that. And they get dusty inside. I think overall it's just nicer to keep them from getting dusty. By the way, the room treatment is Prime Acoustic. The guys over at Prime Acoustic actually gave me a little bit of help designing this. It's called a dead end live end system. So the end where the monitoring is, are you going to focus for me? There we go. The end where the monitoring is a little bit more dead, and as we move back, the sound dampening sort of subsides and the back of the room levels out, and we have this back here, which is a diffuser. So that way the room doesn't sound too dead, and I'm guessing when I'm talking you can hear that it's not 100% dead. There's more reverb as we move to the back of the room, and that's because if you deaden the room too much, you end up it sounds like a vacuum, it sounds a bit strange, and you end up making mixes that are too bright. This is the guitar section. Lots of times there's more guitars here. My production partner Anthony Anderson is a guitar player, and so it's kind of handy that way. I'm going to show you inside this cabinet. So just stepping over guitars here. This cabinet's called the Silent Sister. It's not silent, but what's in here It's a well insulated box. There's a 12-inch in there, and I've got an SM57 and a 421, and those are always in position and ready to go. And so we can plug in a guitar amp, and it goes through this speaker here. We got 2 amps that we use, and that way we can record really loud guitars, which, you know, of course have a certain sound to them, and we can record them in this small space without making our ears bleed. Now, it's still actually pretty loud, but it's a great way to really crank up an amp and get that sound without you know, hurting ourselves or disturbing the people around us. Then moving around, there's the air conditioner, probably the most important piece of gear we have in here. Actually, if we keep that going, then it, you know, keeps us fresher. This is business corner and vocal tuning corner, so we keep all of the business stuff on a different machine, and that way anything that needs to be addressed as far as emails or stuff doesn't interrupt any of the musical processes. And I just feel like having only music software on the main work machine is better. Plus, we've got Melodyne on this machine, and so anytime we need to do any of that stuff, you can take the laptop, go work on a vocal anywhere else. Moving back down the line, this is the power amp for the NS10Ms. Nice big beefy amp. I find that with amps it really does make a difference. People don't think so for a long time. I was using a PA amp, which is down here, probably hard to see, and when I switched to a nice Yamaha amp, and I've also used a Bryston 4B, really big difference. And then down here is my KRK sub. That's a 12-inch, and I don't mix with that on, and I don't try and work with that on too much because it makes it sound too good, too easy, but I definitely need that for checking the bottom end in mixes. So there you go, there's a trip around the room. And I know I have a lot of nice gear, and if you're just starting out, you don't have it, but one of the reasons why I have it is so that when I'm working with someone who's just starting out, they can come here to record, or if you record yourself, and a lot of people like me do this, is all this analog gear imparts certain flavors, and one of the reasons why I keep it all, even though I have a ton of really great plugins, is so that I can use this gear to impart a sonic quality that sounds more like a record instead of all digital stuff. And look, if all you've got is digital stuff, that's what you've got, and you can still make a great sounding record. I just feel like there's room for enhancement, and the analog stuff really does bring something to the table, so that's something that I'm able to offer. And you know, you don't need to start out with all this gear, and you can certainly, as I said, make records without it, but you know, it does help bring it to the next level. If you're just recording yourself, you're doing your own tracks, there's lots of people like me who would be able to help you make your record sound more like a record. So that's why I keep it, and I just love to be able to give those flavors and give independent artists a bigger, deeper, more record-like sound. So if you've got questions about how any of this fits into what I do, I'd love for you to leave them in the comments, and I'll explain further about what the flavors are, how I use them, and what my process might be if you've got any particular questions. In the meantime, if you were interested in what I'm saying and you want to hear more, I will be doing a whole section on microphones next time, so please subscribe. I think the button, is it over here? Please subscribe, and I will share everything I know. Take care. Bye-bye.